Welcome. I'm so excited to be here in this conversation. I'm Rebecca Wildbear, and this is Joseph McCaffrey, my good friend and colleague. And I'm so excited to be here and in this conversation about our upcoming program, Tending Our Hearts in the World, and the exploration of the confluence of soul and trauma. And I'm excited because this is actually a conversation we've been having for the last couple of years. And I've been getting more and more pulled in myself to the point where I've been in my own new trauma counseling to keep exploring further and reading more books on the new theory that Joseph is studying, is certified in, and immersed in NARM. And I have I'm Rebecca, and I've written the book Wild Yoga, a practice of initiation, veneration, and advocacy for the earth. I'm a longtime senior animist guide, and I've studied lots of trauma models as a psychotherapist, Hakomi comprehensive training as a student and as an assistant, somatic archaeology, and other yoga, dance, and movement strategies to work with grounding ourselves and supporting ourselves, as well as wholeness-based practices. And yet, I'm so excited to be in this conversation with Joseph because he introduced me to the NARM model, which actually made me find a NARM informed therapist, a NARM certified therapist to work with and dive deeper into this model, as well as read the books on that particular theory. And it has re-enchanted me with how connected trauma and the soul journey actually are in a way that I never realized, and in a way I think most people don't realize. And yeah, working with him and being in conversation with what he's been studying in that model for several years has pulled me into a deeper exploration of what soul really means and how what it really means to show up and engage with the world in relationship, and the work and presence that's required. And it's been humbling as well as um, revitalizing and heartful and informative. And I'm so grateful, Joseph, to be able to be with you in this conversation and inviting other people in to join us. I know I've had so many questions about this from so many people I work with.
Oh, thanks. I'm really excited to be here. When you were reading the title and the confluence, it feels like um, I've been on this river journey here, partially with you, when 10 years at Animas Valley Institute, really taking a deep dive into the journey to soul and getting to experience you as a guide, as a mentor, through my own apprenticeship. And it's just really fun and exciting to be here to think about the ways that we're going to collaborate on this. Um, Thanks for sharing a few things about me. I've over the last few years, I really have kind of, I guess, been called, surprisingly, to move more deeper into this clinical space as a therapist. Still holding a lot of the pieces from my own soul journey and my relationship with the natural world, but in my own personal experience in coming up to my own unresolved relational complex trauma has been such a powerful journey. It's led me into the NARM Institute, where I um, studied with them in their level 2 training, started to integrate that in my own work, was working with a NARM therapist before that really brought me into the work. Most recently, I just finished the master's training, and now um, I've been so touched by this humanistic, relational, heart-centered model that now I've kind of started to dive into being a training assistant with the institute. So it's really has really been such a huge part of my work, and the whole time, both I think in the soul, in my journey to soul, and in studying NARM, I've really felt, I sense that the soul and trauma really do come together. And I think, today I'm hoping that we'll really um, get deeper into that for our listeners. So one of the things we've been talking about is what we're hoping that our listeners will get from our time today. And I'm personally hoping that we can bring a little bit more understanding around how trauma and soul really do come together, and the way that we can work and be with both of those, that support us in really deeper connection to ourselves, our heart, and the world. Just curious, what are you hoping our listeners are going to get from our time today?
Yeah, I'm hoping that the listeners might become excited about trauma work. And I know that sounds um, like that would be unusual. Most people, when they talk about trauma, it's kind of in a sentence something like, oh gosh, I guess I got to do more trauma work, or oh no, like I have somebody's suggesting I do trauma work again, or this trauma pattern is up again. I guess I can't do the real meaningful soul work because I got to deal with this trauma. And I just want to kind of connect the dots that trauma and soul are not so separate. They're actually, I find there's quite similar ways of both working with them and that they occur. And I'd like to instill a little bit more of an excitement, I guess, for trauma work, and how when we're working in it, it can actually also uh, bring us into a deeper relationship with the world, which is what soul does. Soul brings us into a deeper relationship with ourselves and the world, but so does trauma work. Trauma brings us into a more intimate relationship with our hearts and our capacity for relationship in the world. And so I think that it doesn't have to be so separate. It's actually something that we can be exploring together. And I'd love to revitalize an enthusiasm for that work, and also a bit of a humbling that everyone has trauma work, even if they think they don't. Maybe maybe people who think they don't have even more trauma work. There might
Hmm.
even be more protectors between them and looking at it, but we all have been traumatized by this culture, by the way that we're raised. And so we all have protections and defenses and strategies for maneuvering. And the more that we see it in ourselves and others, the more compassion and possibility there seems. So that's
Yeah,
what I hope.
great. Well, it's exciting. I feel like we've both been really excited about this.
Yeah, I wonder if you might talk about your excitement, where you see the lines of soul
Yeah,
and trauma coming together, and your kind of excitement for this conversation and this immersion.
yeah. Well, it is really exciting to me, actually. Um, and I think that, well, let me just say first, because I think it's important just to kind of clarify that, like, the trauma we're really talking about is relational trauma, complex trauma, which is different than shock trauma, maybe like a single event trauma. But really, and I think this is where I get really excited about it, it's this idea of relational trauma, and really starting to understand the ways that we are in relationship to ourselves and the world. Like, for me in my own journey, this was such a big piece, because I feel like, we were actually talking earlier, and how I loved how you said that, that kind of this transpersonal experience often brings us a lot of visions. And I feel that I have been gifted with a lot of visions and metaphors and images around my soul that I started to get a real sense of. And there was a real aliveness that came with that, and an excitement. And then there was this step of then bringing that into the world, landing and grounding that into the everyday world. And that's where I really struggled. And I had a sense, like, throughout my process, like, when I started to bring it in, that, wait, something's missing here. What is it? And it actually happened during the pandemic. I think probably for a lot of us, the pandemic in many ways mirrored the environmental failure that I had as a child. And it amplified my wounds, which then amplified the way that I was relating to myself and the world around me. And it was actually through a lot of loss of trust. Because as a child, I experienced a lot of um, loss of trust from the adults around me. And the world became pretty unsafe, as you can imagine, as a child. And so I had to develop a lot of ways to navigate that, taking things on, pressuring myself to take things on that really weren't um, reasonable for a child. So a lot of pressuring of myself, which really led to a lot of dysregulation in my life. And so I really started to kind of see that I have this soul image, but how do I bring it into the world if I'm kind of caught in these old ways, and caught in a loss of trust, and caught in these old strategies. So it was such a difficult and powerful has been journey into resolving this, and these this trauma, which I feel has given me a greater capacity to like hold all of myself, and to hold soul, and to bring that more confidently and more resourced into the day to day. And I'm excited to share that with folks. I'm excited to be a part of that in whatever way shows up in this kind of journey together that we're on.
Mm,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. How about you? What are you what are you excited about?
You know what has excited me in doing this work and bringing in the trauma piece is the slowing down, and as you
Yeah.
named before in our talk, being curious about things. I think that's what always excited me about the soul journey in many ways, having conversations with nature and dream images and deep imagination, and being able to slow down and be curious instead of judging or thinking that we know, but actually that there might be more here than we know. And what would it be like to be in relationship? And in the trauma work that I'm doing, I found that instead of beating myself up for the ways that I want to hide. I originally partly went into trauma work for numerous things bothering me, but I also just published a book, and that pulled me out into the world in a greater way. And so my coping strategies, part of them were to hide from the world. The world is a dangerous place. To be big and seen is really dangerous. And so what my muse had been asking me to do was really at odds with my trauma patterns, which were all about like taking cover, not, not being out there. And so I realized if I was to do what the muse asked me to do, there's no way I was going to be able to without facing the parts of me that were really terrified.
Yeah.
And then I could go into shame about that. Oh, why am I still here? Why is this happening?
Mm,
Why do I still want to do this? And instead, the work was more about slowing down and being curious. Yeah, I wonder why that's true.
mhm,
What is it about your life and your person? It's not about going back into regressive stories or reliving the past, other than remembering things we might need to understand the present. But it's really like being curious about where I'm not able to fully show up in the world or in relationship, even if I have a vision or think that this is where I am being called to go. Um, and the slowing down has helped make me more intimate with myself and my own heart, and take my time more. That the muse might have a guiding vision, but I don't have to get there tomorrow.
yeah.
And that there might be something just in my wander today, or my way of being present with myself today, that is changing everything.
Yeah. No, I love that.
And yeah, and it also being curious and slowing down. It's something that decreases shame, and I should have, and I need to, and I have to, and just allows us to love, have a greater amount of love and honoring of wherever we are. And also in being more compassionate toward ourselves, a greater capacity for compassion towards others, because we are all suffering from trauma, even if it doesn't look like it, and even if a person doesn't think they are. I think it's impossible to be raised in this culture, this traumatizing culture, without some level of trauma, and also, you know particularly relational trauma.
Yeah. No, I absolutely agree. And I think that's such a beautiful way to say it. I mean, that piece around shame is so I think it's so important to start to understand how shame has really um, served us, what the wisdom in shame. Because as a child, when I mean, this is what I've learned is that when the environment fails around us, an environment as a child we rely on to survive in the world, what would be safer for a child? Something wrong with these caretakers, the adults, our teachers, our parents, or that there's something wrong with us? Like as a child, we can't see that. It'd be too dangerous to see that they don't have the capacity, our parents don't have the capacity to care for us. So often what we do is shame ourselves as a way to create hope, as a way to create a sense of that there's hope in my universe. And unfortunately, though, that kind of way of relating to ourselves can so easily, I know for myself, get carried then into adulthood. For me personally, it was around like I grew up a dyslexic learner and a real in a Catholic school that was really punitive. And so when I had a need to learn to read and then was punished for it, what I did with that as a child was make myself bad. I gained a real sense of unworthiness around that. And then I kind of created a whole structure around that to survive in the world. And I love what you're saying, like that slowing down, like just really, I mean, this is what I'm hoping we're going to provide as a space for all of us to really slow down and get curious about our own inner experience, get curious about how we're relating to ourselves so that we might create another possibility, like compassion, because that's such an antidote when we can start to see the wisdom in our in the way that we had to learn to survive in the world with compassion. That just opens up a doorway to a whole new possibility to be in relationship with ourselves and the world, which seems like that would beautifully dovetail into if soul is one of the most authentic ways of living in the world, that could feel a little dangerous. if we're like you said, like you said, like bumping up against some of our edges, that could feel dangerous if we're being asked to bring ourselves more into the world. So it really is there really is a confluence there of the way that we can slow down and get curious and start to understand these aspects of
Mhm.
ourselves. Yeah.
Yeah, as you're speaking, I'm feeling in our in the title in our program how we bring together heart and soul.
Yeah.
And in some ways we're talking about the confluence of soul and trauma, but we're also talking about the confluence of heart and soul,
Yeah.
because it's our heart that really has been traumatized,
Hmm.
and the soul in many ways is the visionary. It is a visionary agent. It's the one that shows us our largest possibility in this intricate thread of life with the grander cosmos, earth, larger world, the mystery we're called to live. And it's so wonderful to get that vision. And it's also so humbling, like, oh my gosh, it always seems so much, it always seems, even from the beginning, so much grander than I could ever live. And yet so worth it, so worth trying for, so worth moving toward in whatever way I possibly can. And yet, as we do move toward it, as we do live it, our heart can get crushed. It can get hurt again and again, by all the things that can happen in the way that when we show up in the world, and all the things that happen that are related to all the things that happened to us as a child, and that are also happening in the larger world, too, and breaking our hearts. And so I don't know, I feel this program a real confluence of heart and soul. And how can we be present and engaged with our heart and all of its traumas, and as we live our soul into the world, and or as we listen for our soul.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, as you're saying that, like what comes up for me is like um, connection and disconnection in a sense that, and again, I can just speak to my experience, but when there was a loss of trust, I really had to build armor around my heart, which was disconnecting from myself. and I had to do that as a way to um well, as children, we just don't have the capacity to hold some of these feelings that arrive, like the grief and the sadness and the anger that may come from our needs not being met or the environment failing around us. But often that's so much pain. So for me, it was a process of having to disconnect and then having to realize my capacity now as an adult to reconnect to my heart and to um, be with the energy behind a lot of those feelings and emotions that I had to disconnect from in my heart. But in doing so, that just opens up again that more aliveness. I can be more alive with myself and in relationship to the world and others. And
Beautiful.
yeah,
Beautiful. I love that. It's making me think too of boundaries. That I don't know, that's what's coming to me because I often struggled with that in my early life, the capacity to be able to set boundaries, to know where boundaries are. And trauma has come through wounding of broken boundaries, and then therefore not also know where to set them. But one of the antidotes to, that is setting boundaries, setting a lot of boundaries. But sometimes you set too many boundaries, then you can set not enough boundaries and you can set too many. And if you've partly not learned that because of not knowing your own heart, and when it's been hurt, you can do both. You can not set enough boundaries or you can set too many. And how do we move through life both protecting our heart, because it does need to be protecting. It's not like our heart's supposed to just always be out there in the world everywhere all the time, always open. But how do we know those places where we set boundaries and we protect our heart, and also places where we can open our heart? And also, how do we stay open to our heart when with whatever place we are? We're decided that we're turning in a place of protection with it, or where we're in a place of connecting, reaching out, and taking a risk.
yeah, yeah. That's so important to acknowledge too, that these strategies and the ways we learn to survive aren't something we get rid of. That actually can be more conscious in how we use them. My the lead faculty in the NARM Institute often talks about keeping your strategies in your back pocket. And it is true that we all are humans, have a capacity, and sometimes we reach our capacity and we need to pull those strategies to protect our hearts, like you're saying. So I think that's just a lovely way, again, as we slow it down, to come from that place of compassion, as opposed to we start to judge ourselves around using our strategies or pressure ourselves not to use them. And then we find ourselves back in this loop of really taking us away from what we really want for ourselves, which is often to be more connected, more authentic, more at peace, more alive, and embodying who we really are.
Mm. So what do you think is at risk at the world in the world if people didn't pay attention to trauma, or didn't acknowledge its existence, didn't acknowledge how it affects them or relates to their soul or spirit journey, their life? What's at risk?
Yeah. Well, it's so interesting when you start to, I think it's like anything, you start to study something and then you start to like really see the world through that. And I think, so for me, like the risk is, well, what's happening right now? There's so much conflict. There's so much polarization. There's so much um, disconnection from the knowing that we are of the natural world. And so that's kind of on a meta bigger. But I think for us as individuals, like I mean, my sense was for me that like, um, uh, I don't know how to say, like, it's not like something needs to happen, but like nothing would happen. Like here I am, like connected deeply with this soul image, and I'm still relating to myself and the world in these old strategies, which really in many ways is the child consciousness. So the risk on one level is more suffering, more dysregulation. Like I could get really stuck in, I have this image. Why am I not bringing it into the world? Like holding an expectation, pressuring myself. And then nothing happens. I'm just kind of spinning my wheels in a sense. As opposed to like creating the conditions within myself and within my family and within the world for possibility, for openness. You know, not that something specific needs to happen. I mean, I'm hoping that my soul image will enrich my life in the world, but I can hold that in a way that's like I can be active in that without pressure or berating myself. And that's such a different experience than the latter, which is much more suffering, much more difficult, much more challenging. Yeah, what are your thoughts? I'm curious.
Well, when I look at the world, I feel like that in many ways our dominant culture is living this question,
Yeah,
which is all of life on Earth is at risk, the whole planet, all of life, because when we live out of of an unconscious, traumatized way, we inflict the trauma that we've suffered on all living things around us,
yeah. Mm.
and so it's just heartbreaking. And I know in some ways it seems like so it always sometimes seems like it's easier to do the unhealthy thing. It's easier to just keep doing the same thing. That's oftentimes the strategy that even that I've experienced or seen is this sort of repetitive, just doing what we have that comforts in our limited range, addictions or things like that that bring comfort. But yeah, this way of just repeating the trauma, recapitulating what's already happened, doing the same thing, and not opening, not listening enough to be like, oh, this is deeply hurting and not working, and I need something else. I'm not sure how I'm going to get there, but I can at least start there.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that one of the there's a couple of things I was thinking about as you shared that is this idea of agency, which really is like a capacity that we have, that we can have or cultivate as an adult that we just didn't have as a child. We didn't have agency. We couldn't, 5 years old, if things weren't working out, we couldn't go move out and get a job and go take care of ourselves. We were really in that space. And so part of this is, which is both, I think, at least in my own experience, was in a sense terrifying, but also deeply empowering, is that I have agency in my own healing and in my own life. And I think the connection and the recognition and the integration of that agency leads to a completely different relationship with our soul and the way that we can bring it in the world. And what might be at risk
Mm-hmm.
is, again, coming back to that question, what's at risk is that just that continual experiencing ourselves in the world with a lack of agency. Whereas then
Mm-hmm.
when we're in that space, I think it's very difficult to embody really anything that's authentic in a way that really sustains us. So I think and this is kind of was leading into my second question, is because I was thinking about, as we're talking about this and we're sharing this with folks who might want to come and join us, like, how are we going to, how are we going to work with this in a space with others? And I mean, I think you've already alluded to some of that, like slowing down, creating a container, creating a really strong, safe container where we can really slow down and get curious about our own inner experience, how we're relating to that, without kind of external interpretation or anyone making meaning of that for us, that we're really getting a chance to be in our own agency, our own relationship with our inner experience, and really creating the conditions of the space for others to really experience that, or have the opportunity to explore or get curious about their own experience. I was curious, like, if there's any thoughts you have of how we might like hold this space, or really work with folks in, or maybe even the question is like, how have you been bringing these two together in your work and working with like soul and trauma?
I think, well, there's a couple ways I think they do come together. One is the slowing down and being
Yeah.
curious that we spoke about. We do when we listen to the wild world and dreams and nature, and we do in relationship with our own hearts and other people. They're very similar ways of being, just in different contexts. Another is, I think, in soul work we talk a lot about the core vulnerabilities and the sacred wound and
Mm.
the sacred gifts. There are soul gifts that come from the sacred wound. And I think the conversation that we're having around trauma, and relational trauma in particular, is very connected to our core vulnerabilities in life, which are also connected to our core gifts. And so we might not ever know our core gifts if there's an unwillingness to explore trauma. And if there's a willingness to explore trauma as not as trauma itself, not sacred. The trauma is atrocious, and it's sad that it's happened, but it is human. It's part of the human experience in this incarnation seeming. And what is sacred is our hearts and the way that they've experienced it. And what might be traumatizing to one person might not be traumatizing to another. So it's not about judging, oh, is this a bad enough thing to feel bad about, or anything like that. It's really about the truth of our hearts. And I like truth lately. It's a word I've always liked. I think one of the hardest things for me in relationship has been a sense that I can't tell the truth, uh, because it will hurt other people or they can't take it. I'm by nature, I love to speak the truth, just love it. And I'm a writer. And I think something I'd want to cultivate in our space together is that does that sacred space, that our hearts are sacred, that the truths of our hearts are sacred, and that there's not a judgment about it being an evaluation of where you are in the journey or anything like that. It's actually just, um, we're welcoming the tenderness of your heart, and a holding in curiosity to explore and be able to perhaps speak things that you haven't spoken before, and even
Mm.
be surprised by what you discover, that as you start to speak about it, it might not be what you think.
Yeah. And I'm curious, like, how do you see, I mean, that's so beautiful. Thank you for sharing all that, because I really feel that space of opportunity to connect with this sacred space to connect to our hearts. And I'm wondering how you see the natural world, or the animate natural world, weaving into that for you, the relationship there.
Yeah, I find for me, like, the animate natural world is so grounding, and so it's self-regulating, but it's regulating.
Yeah.
I mean, I have regulated myself so much in relationship to nature because I couldn't self-regulate nearly as well as nature could help me regulate.
Mhm.
And that's still true. Two of my loves have been nature and yoga in my life. And I think that goes with saying that I've naturally gravitated to things that regulate my nervous system because I needed it. And you know, the these these conversations that we have in nature, they regulate our nervous system and show us how we have so much more help in regulating our nervous system. But they go even deeper than that with the soul part, which is that I believe that nature is more intelligent than us. and is connected to being able to hold a vision for how we really exist in symphony with the world. We can play our part, how we can live our mythic story. And we may not be ready for the full download all at once. We most usually aren't. Most people aren't. But we usually get some glimmer of something. It's like this, be this. This is the next step. This is the next piece in the journey. And so the process by which we get called to keep coming back and listening, because we can feel that one, we're regulated and healthy in the presence of nature. So many people gravitate there, even if they're not in a conversation.
Mhm.
And we can take the relationship deeper by actually having a conversation that nature naturally wants to give to us. Naturally wants us to flower and be ourselves like it's everything else in nature. We're connected. And if we can open ourselves to that conversation, which can be terrifying because maybe, what will be asked will be really scary to the ego, or we'll think it's something we can't do, or not what we might want to do, or all sorts of things. We're out of control. We can't just figure it out ourselves. But it ultimately, there's no greater gift than to be who we are. And nature wants to help us find that
Mhm. Yeah.
one step at a time, one piece at a time, whatever piece we're ready for now.
Mm. This is yeah, beautifully said. This is where I think I get the excitement of. I just feel such a resonance with what you're sharing and the way that we will with our intention to really set up space where I know we're online, but we'll also have some time is between our online experiences to really have these conversations, to invite people if they're willing into these conversations with the natural world that is animated, that's alive and ensouled, that's aware of us, and we are aware of the beings around us, and deepen into that opportunity of that conversation that's, I believe, is happening all the time. And it's about being more conscious and connected and open to being in it. Yeah. Mm.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm excited for the possibility of what it means for all of us, for any of us, for anyone who wants to come into deeper conversation with our own hearts, including the hurt places that have been too hard to look at or understand, or too overwhelming to grasp, and as well as our relationship to the greater web of life and what our soul song is, which we all have in that web.
It's great. Yeah. And I'm um I'm feeling my heart and hearing this, and kind of the uh the connection to the excitement of this possibility, and the tenderness of what we're inviting, um and I'm just really wondering about, maybe even just some logistical pieces of, sharing a little bit about, like, what how folks can get in contact with us, how, if they have questions, um, if yeah, just kind of some of those logistical pieces. Is there anything we feel like called to kind of share about this
Yeah,
program?
I think that we said that it's 6 2-hour sessions
Hmm.
on over Monday
Yep.
with us together,
Hmm.
and we are recording it only to be shared with people in the group. And if you have to miss a session, it's okay. You can listen to the recording later. We are offering Wander invitations and some other possibilities to keep exploring the questions and practices that we're exploring together in the week or weeks in between sessions. And uh, we're offering a possibility of, you could, if you want to, meet either Joseph or I outside of session, or an individual session, or one or more. that's up to you. It's not an obligation, but it's something you would like to do. Feel free to reach out.
Mhm.
Those are some of the logistics I can think of. Do you,
Yeah,
and if you have questions about this version, you can always email either one of us to
yeah,
ask. We can answer via email, or if you feel like a conversation is needed, we have a conversation.
great. Yeah, I'm totally open to taking emails and answering any conversations that I can I can answer any questions that anyone has, and we can yeah, I just want to support everybody and really getting a sense of themselves and how they're what's coming up for them or what's drawing them to this work, and we can, you know, clarify anything that needs to be clarified or have conversations. So I'm really, again, just excited to uh, just to be able to work with you. I really appreciate, Rebecca, the way that you know, in my experience of you, um, the way your relationship with the wild world has always inspired me in the way that you it seems to me, you could tell me, but in my experience, like at least it awakens my deeper connection to the natural world. I really experience you as someone who has a deep connection to the natural world that has awakened that in me, as well as just like such um so solid in all of your investment into the trainings around trauma and as a therapist. And it always has felt so, just from a participant experience or an apprentice um, role, it's always felt really solid and contained and supportive. And I think that's what I'm really excited about, because I value that so much in my own work. And it's been a learning for me of how to really to create the conditions or a container for such um, a experience, to explore depth experiences. So I'm really excited to be a part of that with you and explore these two really exciting but challenging and tender aspects of soul and trauma.
Thank you so much.
Hmm.
Thank you. And I'm excited to work with you too. So if I have so enjoyed sitting with you and your family, your wife and children, and the times I visited, and witnessing your capacity for relationship with your family and also me. And primarily here, we're talking about the value of relationship and, as a central component of the soul's journey. And so witnessing your capacity with me and others at relationship, as well as your training with NARM, which I believe to be a better model than ones that I've studied, even though I'm grateful for the ones I have studied. I'm grateful that you've been getting versed in this model, which I'm kind of in love with. And I'm so glad that we'll be bringing all of this in together with others.
Yeah. Yay. Well, I'm looking forward to meeting those who will find their way here and create this container together, this experience together. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, we look forward to working with you.
Yeah.
Conversation about this conversation that we're in love with. So,
Feel complete?
stop the recording. I get you. Let me see if I find the button.